Welcome to Sola Church Online.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rigg. This is my wife, Miranda Landers. Together, we are planting a life-giving church in Santa Monica, California this fall, 2021. While waiting for LA County to reopen, we launched online. So we're glad that you're with us. If you're watching on the church online platform and want to invite someone to watch with you, you can click invite in the chat feed.
And if you're watching on Facebook, you can share this to your timeline.
If you watch later on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any content coming out of Sola Church.
And Alan, we got some big news this week.
Yeah, we did. The whole state of California got some big news. It was announced that California is set to fully reopen June 15th. So I think we're all kind of waiting to see exactly what that means and exactly what that looks like. But obviously, that's really good news for us as we anticipate launching Sola Church in person in the fall. Our startup parties that are virtual now hopefully can, transition to being in person in June. That would be awesome.
Oh, yeah.
And also, of course, when we do launch in the fall, we're going to be, meeting someplace to be determined. It could be a school, it could be a theater, some kind of public meeting space. Most of those spaces have been closed and no one knew when they would reopen. So now there is light at the end of the tunnel. Like now we can start having those conversations and figuring out where exactly we're going to launch when we do launch in person. So
very, very exciting.
Yeah, totally.
And now let's worship. flashes of lightning, rolls of thunder. Blessing and power, strength and glory and power be to you, the only wise King. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Filled with wonder, awestruck wonder, at the mention of your name. Jesus, your name is power, breath and living water, such a marvelous mystery. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you. I will With all creation I sing praise to the King of Kings. You are my everything, and I will adore you.
Well, this is that time in our service when we worship with our giving. If you are checking Sola Church online out today, if you are a virtual guest, please don't feel obligated to give. But for those of us who consider Sola Church online our church home, this is a very meaningful part of our service. So you'll see a link in the chat feed. If you click that, it'll open a separate window so you won't miss anything. The service will continue to stream. Of course, once you get there, you can make a one-time tax-deductible donation or even schedule a recurring donation. You can always go to our website, solachurch.life, and click Give to get to that same page. And for those who prefer to give on PayPal, the email address that you'll need for that is give@solachurch.life. Your generosity is making it possible not only for us to do church online every week, but also preparing us for that in-person launch in the fall. We're going to make a major investment in equipment, in furniture, and technology, and transportation to load that in and out of that space we talked about before. So each week, we're just saving a little more, and then a little more, and then a little more toward that goal. Thank you guys very much.
And Alan, we are just 1 week away from our next startup party.
Yeah, that's right. So, man, it is all about the startup parties. These virtual events are fast, fun, 60-minute Zoom meetings. We have food delivered to your door. There are games and giveaways, video elements. Near the end, we share our vision for Sola Church. And everyone has the opportunity to fill out a private digital response card indicating their interest level going forward. The next couple startup parties are, as you said, one is a week away. It's next Sunday, April 18th at 4 p.m. And then the next one after that is actually on a Wednesday. So it's May 5th at 6:30 p.m. But we want you, if you're anywhere near West LA, we want you at our startup party. We want you on our launch team. We hope that you'll join us.
Absolutely. And if you want to register, you just go to solachurch.life, click Startup Parties, and choose your date. And today we are starting a new series, right, Alan?
Can't wait. We are, yep.
Let's get into our time of teaching.
So this morning we are in 1 Samuel 17, and we're going to talk about a legendary giant. Not Cyclops, not Jack's giant, not Bigfoot, not Paul Bunyan, not the Jolly Green Giant, but Goliath of Gath. He's legendary, but he's no mere legend. He was a real person, Goliath, from a real place, Gath. And as chapter 17 opens, we see two mountains, and in between a valley, and in the middle of that valley a brook. On one side are the Philistines, and on the other side are the Israelites. For 200 years, the Philistines and the Israelites had been going at it. In chapter 14, the Philistines were routed, but they had since regrouped and were seeking revenge. It's about to get real. And so with that, we come to verse 4. It says, "And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and his shield bearer went before him." You know, for the sake of comparison, we could talk about Laker LeBron James, who stands 6'8". He weighs 250 pounds. And King James, well, he wears size 15 shoes. That's big, right? But what about Laker legend Shaquille O'Neal? Shaq stands 7'1", weighs 325 pounds, and wears a size 22 plus shoe. Imagine that. I mean, I could live in a size 22 shoe. But Goliath? Well, in verse 4, it says that Goliath's height was 6 cubits and a span. A cubit is the distance from the tip of your middle finger to your elbow, roughly 18 inches. And a span is the distance from the tip of your thumb to the tip of your little finger, roughly 9 inches. So Goliath, well, if LeBron James is 6'8" and Shaquille O'Neal is 7'1", Goliath may have stood 9'9". Listen to the description of his defensive armor. He had a helmet, verse 5. A coat of mail, verse 5. A coat of mail is an armored coat extending from shoulders to knees. His weighed about 125 pounds. Just that by itself. It says that he had armor on his legs in verse 6. That armor is referred to as greaves. And then a man-sized shield carried by a shield bearer is mentioned in verse 7. But it wasn't just the defensive armor. He also had offensive weapons. Notice the javelin in verse 6. The javelin was a medium-range weapon that you would throw. And then the spear in verse 7, this was longer and heavier. It was used in hand-to-hand combat. Later on in verse 51, we'll discover that Goliath also had a sword. I think it's safe to say that Goliath was packing heat. And so, picking it up in verse 8, it says, "Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, 'Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we might fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Look quickly at verse 16. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. So we already know that Goliath was big, but not only was he big, he was scary. And not only was he big and scary, but he could talk trash. He was challenging an Israelite, any one Israelite, to a duel. This would be a contest between champions. And actually, it was an interesting alternative to a conventional battle in which hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands might die. In this case, one would die. Win and your army wins with you. Lose and your army loses with you. And so in verse 16, we learn that he presented this challenge twice a day. For 40 days, 80 times, he's given this little rant. He's thrown down this little challenge. Well, with that backstory, today we begin a new series called Takedown. We're talking about defeating the giants in your life. A dictionary definition of the word giant: something unusually large or powerful. What is your giant? Maybe you're not sure. Let me help by saying that you deal with it by day and think about it at night. It could be that thing that makes you feel anxious and afraid, or that thing that makes you feel guilt and shame, so you hide it. Even that thing that makes you angry or defensive when it comes up, when it's brought up by others. You know, there are some things that we just can't seem to start, and other things that we just can't seem to stop. That might be your giant. Your giant might be a dream that's turned into a nightmare, or a goal that's become unattainable. Bottom line is, we all have giants in our lives. Things that stand between what is and what could be. Between who we are and who we're becoming. Between where we are and where we're going. Things that seem impossible to overcome. What does the Bible say about defeating the giants in your life? Are you ready for a takedown? Well, let's look at the first couple of principles this morning, and we'll get more in the next couple of weeks. But here's the first thing I want to share with you today, and that is that your takedown can start today, even if the opportunity is small. So look with me, beginning in verse 12, it says, Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So, meet David. He was the baby brother in a big family, the youngest of 8 boys, 8 sons. Do you come from a big family? Maybe like David, you're even the baby of the family. I saw something on the internet that I thought was interesting. These were signs that you grew up with a big family. I chose just 5 of them. 5 signs that you grew up with a big family. So number 5, you're highly skilled at licking, spitting in, or otherwise altering foods so that your siblings won't eat them. Did you ever do that? Like, really? Number 4, you've woken up extra early to shower so you can use the hot water before it runs out. Surely there's people who relate to that. Number 3, you rarely bought clothes from a real store until college because shopping always meant hand-me-downs. Number 2, you can figure out how to fit any amount of people into any car. No problem. And then number 1, you've peed your pants just a little from having to wait too long for the bathroom. Anybody relate to that? Anybody at all? Let us hear from you in the chat feed. Well, the thing is, this kid, David, this kid was the next big thing. And he knew it. And his brothers knew it. And his dad knew it. In the previous chapter, the most remarkable thing had happened. God sent the prophet Samuel to anoint a new king, even though there was a king already, King Saul. And Samuel, well, in chapter 16, verse 13, it says that Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him, that is David, in the midst of his brothers. So David was God appointed and Samuel anointed. He was not just the next big thing, he was the next king. But in spite of that, he's struggling working 2 part-time jobs. In the palace, one in the palace with Saul as a musician, the other in the pasture with his dad as a shepherd. Musician? Well, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. I mean, we love being musicians, and we have loved touring the country as Miranda has shared her music at churches from California to Maine. But again, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. I remember in one 18-month span, period of time that spanned 2016, 2017, we spent 15 of 18 months on the road. I mean, that's hard. We weren't in private planes at 5-star hotels. We were in a 31-foot C-class motorhome. And again, as much as we loved it, I'm just saying, for David, being a part-time musician was not as glamorous as it sounds. And shepherd? Well, think Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. You remember that show? Anybody ever watch that? You know, one time on a ministry trip to Australia, I actually got to shear a sheep. And the shearers were not using hand shears. They were using the machine shears called hand pieces. So I was given a hand piece, and all I did was take one sort of tentative, pass and cut a little bit of wool or whatever. But these guys, the shearers, oh my goodness, I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, they would take a sheep, and just as fast as you can imagine, they would shear it. And if I'm keeping it real, they were not being real careful. As these animals were squirming, they were getting nicked, cut, even gashed. And it was almost sort of horrifying to see that right after the shearer came the sutures. There was literally someone there sewing up wounds as quickly as these sheep were shorn. So it was a dirty job. What I want you to imagine then is David going from the palace, back to the pasture, back to the palace, back to the pasture again. I don't know about you, but that does not sound like the job description of a king. I remember I was at Starbucks once and I heard a woman on her cell phone talking about her job saying, "I'm better than that." She said it several times, and it could be that if I knew her situation, I would agree 100%. In no way am I making a judgment about that or about her, but it just got me to thinking about this idea. You don't get your dignity from your job. Your job gets its dignity from you. My first real job was as a dishwasher. First job where I, clocked in and clocked out and got a paycheck. That's right, I was washing dishes. Soon after that, I got a job working at Chuck E. Cheese. And sometimes, that's right, you guessed it, sometimes I was Chuck E. Cheese. I had to put on the mouse costume and, come out and mingle with the kids. Of course, I wasn't allowed to talk, but I could come up and give kids side hugs and, just kind of be out there interacting a little bit. I remember one time, as I was reaching with my hand, one kid saw a small gap between the glove and the sleeve. He could see my arm through that gap. And that kid said, "Hey, you're not real." My assistant manager, who was all of 18, 19 years old, said, "Life's rough, isn't it, kid?" It was brutal. But listen, your job has as much dignity as you bring to it. If something about your job feels undignified to you, there is a possibility that says more about you than it does about your job. The Bible tells us, as people of faith, as followers of Christ, we're to do our jobs with all of our heart. We're to do them as unto God and not unto men, and that we're not to be eye pleasers. In other words, not just working when the boss is watching. Well, picking it up in verse 17, it says, Then Jesse said to his son David, Take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. Now, we probably have a military family watching today. You know, any family that's ever had a family member deployed knows how closely you watch cable news. You know, if you know that your family member is in a particular part of the world, I mean, you're really attuned. You're really tuned in to any news that's coming from that part of the world. Well, in ancient times, I mean, they didn't have CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or any of those things. The only way that you could get an update would be to send someone. And so, you know, David's dad tells him to take the chuck wagon, the lunch truck, jump in the roach coach, drive it down to the valley of Elah, and feed your brothers. Don't you think David could have felt like, this is beneath me? I'm better than this. I know you're getting old, Dad, but the prophet said king, not caterer. Picking it up in verse 20, it says, So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep with a keeper, and took the things, and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and came and greeted his brothers. Now notice the action words in verse 20. Rose, left, took, and went. And notice also that phrase, as Jesse commanded. Did David arrogantly demand to be served? No. Instead, he served. He served his dad, he served his brothers, he served their CO. So listen, today's obedience will determine tomorrow's opportunities, that is. Let me say it again. Today's obedience will determine tomorrow's opportunities. And so we could talk about the importance of doing the little things in life. We could talk about the importance of being patient. We could talk about the importance of realizing that the person we're going to be tomorrow is the one we're becoming today. It's not unlike that thing we call the butterfly effect, where a very small change can create a significantly different outcome. I think often it's like that in ways that we don't know, in ways that we can't see now. Maybe in ways that we'll understand and appreciate later in life, or certainly after this life is over, when we are looking at this whole experience here on earth in the rearview mirror, where we're going to realize how sometimes those smallest steps, those times where we took advantage, where we were opportunistic with the smallest opportunities, how that led to greater opportunities. You don't know, but that small opportunity that you have today is the very thing that will open the door to that greater opportunity tomorrow. So again, today's obedience will determine tomorrow's opportunities. One more thought. Some years ago, I read a popular Christian book on depression, and one of the things that said that they had observed was that if a depressed person were to do something to help someone else, it actually helped in some way to relieve their depression. Now, with that thought in mind, that's a very complex subject, and I know that I'm barely scratching the surface of it and mentioning it. But with that thought in mind, is there a giant in your life? May I suggest that you look for someone with a giant in his or her life and find a way to take bread and cheese to them in their personal valley. You might be surprised how an act of service like that, what might seem like a relatively small opportunity, will lead to greater opportunities and will actually help you as you take down your own giant. So, your takedown can begin today, even if the opportunity is small. We're going to look at one more thing this week, and then we're going to save more for the next couple weeks. But your takedown can start today, can begin today, even if the obstacles are big. So look with me in verse 23. It says, then, as he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. They repeated it. So this was the 41st day of Goliath's taunting. Now, going back to Shaq for a minute, remember that Shaq, wears a size 22 plus shoe, but he didn't always. Shaq wasn't always Shaq. Shaq became Shaq over time. At age 6, he wore a size 2 shoe. At age 10, size 7.5. At 16, he wore a size 15. And then now, as I've said several times, as an adult, a size 22 plus. Here's my point. If you tolerate a giant, it will take over. If you tolerate a giant, it will take over. It will get bigger and bigger and take over the valley of your life. You can't let that happen. We don't tolerate giants. We take them down. So David shows up and he hears the morning challenge. He learns Saul's incentive plan. A cash reward, a babe for a bride, no taxes, and no takers. Like what? He couldn't believe that nobody was acting, that nobody was, doing anything. Now, I imagine that these people would have said to David, have you seen Goliath's armor? Look at Goliath's weapons. Look at Goliath's size. All of those things were so painfully obvious. Do you know anyone who's master of the obvious? I think we're all masters of the obvious sometimes. I know I am. It's hot outside. Everybody knows it's hot outside. And we're like, it's so hot outside. Master of the obvious. Like, what was your first clue? Was it the thermometer that says that it's, triple digits? Was it the fact that all of our shirts are stuck to our backs? Or when we're sitting at a stoplight and it just takes forever, and finally we say out loud, this light is taking forever. Master of the obvious. Well, the people around David were all masters of the obvious. Goliath's got lots of armor. Master of the obvious. Goliath's got lots of weapons. Master of the obvious. Goliath is huge. Master of the obvious. Everyone. Saul, David's brothers, the whole army, everyone was focused on Goliath. And the more they focused on Goliath, the smaller God became. But David, he was focused on God. And the more he focused on God, the smaller Goliath became. To David, the only giant was God. Do you understand that? That in truth, the only giant in your story is God. And as we focus on the giants, little g, God gets smaller. But as we focus on God, the giants get smaller. There's this passage, another giant story in the Old Testament book of Numbers, where the spies had been sent into the land to spy out the land that God had promised to his people. And when they returned from their trip, there were two groups. One group of spies said, we saw the giants and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. The other group said, do not fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. So the first group, basically what they said is, compared to the giants, we're grasshoppers. And the second group said, compared to God, it's a piece of cake. And that's why I like to say that there are two kinds of people in this world. There are grasshoppers and there are cake eaters. Which are you? Are you focused on your giants or are you focused on God? If you're focused on your giants, you're going to see yourself as a grasshopper. and you're going to feel despair. If you focus on God, you're going to see yourself as a cake eater, and you're going to feel hope. So, is it the giants or is it God? Is it grasshoppers or cake eaters? Is it despair or is it hope? The truth is that your takedown can begin today. Your takedown can begin even if the opportunity is small. Your obedience today will determine your opportunities tomorrow. Your takedown can begin today, even if the obstacles are big. And so, as we close this message with a word of prayer, I want to pray for you that your takedown would begin today. I can't wait to hear the stories in the days and weeks ahead of the takedowns that take place in the lives of those people who are a part of Sola Church Online. So let's just have a word of prayer right now. Father, I'm so grateful that you are so much bigger. You are infinitely bigger than the giants in our lives. That in fact, you are the only giant in our lives. And I pray that we could focus on you in a new way. That we could turn our focus from those things that seem like giants to us, and we could fix that focus on you. And as we do that, that our whole perspective would change. I pray that we could, not only overcome this sense that the obstacles are too big, but that as we talked about earlier, we would also understand that no opportunity is too small. That you're giving us small opportunities today to begin this takedown. Small opportunities that will lead to bigger opportunities. And Lord, may we be all in. May we do whatever it is that you're asking us to do today, believing that you're in control of all things, that things don't have to stay the way they are, that whatever stands between the way things are and the way they could be, who we are and who we're becoming, where we are and where we're going, that you are wanting to move those things out of the way as we understand and apply these principles to our lives. We'll give you thanks in Jesus' name.
And now it's time to fill out a connection card.
Yeah, so as always, there's a link in the chat feed, but you could go to the website, solachurch.life, and click contact. That's where the connection card lives. That's where you can decide if you want to participate in a virtual small group, or even if you want to join the launch team. Like, you can join the launch team today by filling out a connection card and clicking on that little bubble. But for those of you that want to attend the startup party next Sunday, or even the one after that on Wednesday, May 5th, be sure to go to the webpage again, solachurch.life. But for that, click startup parties, and then you choose your date, you register, and do that this afternoon. We're gathering names and seeing who's coming, and we're anxious to hear from you.
And also, just a reminder, we would love to connect with you more.
Yeah.
And you can do that by following us on social media, like liking on Facebook, following us on Instagram or Twitter, subscribing to YouTube. All of those things are great ways to connect.
That's right. And also, you can help get word out by simply liking posts, tagging people in the comments, sharing posts on your own page. That's huge. If you know anyone in or near West LA who might want to be a part of our launch team, a part of what we're doing, we'd love for you to let them know about what's going on, or better yet, make an introduction, introduce us to each other. You may even have a friend in some other part of the country who you think would enjoy watching these online services. And so, tagging them in a post is a great way to draw their attention to it. Appreciate you guys helping us that way.
Absolutely. And we hope that you have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everybody.